Welcome to the April UTBA meeting. We've got lots of good information for you tonight. We're going to begin, as always, with Marion, Whittam, and her beekeeping calendar.
Thank you, Lucy, and good evening, everyone. I'm doing the beekeeping calendar for April. Some really good news, though. The UTBA Beekeepers calendar for Toronto and GTA is complete. If you recall, in the fall, I reached out to our membership to see if I could get some help to work on it as a team, and it's now complete. So that's great news. It's posted on our UTBA website, the Beekeeping Resources section, under utba.org, and it can be downloaded at any time. Also, really good news, every paid member is eligible to receive a free color copy of this informative calendar. They will receive a unique code by email and can order it from the Canada Beekeeping website, or they can drop by the Canada Beekeeping Supply Store. The calendar is 24 pages of beekeeping resources. It talks about the monthly tasks to perform indoors and in the apiary, provides climate data for Toronto and the GTA, the flowers in bloom each month, and beautiful pictures of bees in the bee yard. In addition, the final page of the calendar gives information about urban beekeeping and also references about beekeeping videos, blogs, and websites. I have to sincerely thank my dedicated team of volunteers who worked for 4 months from November 2021 until the end of February of this year to create this beautiful calendar. Credit goes to Lyn for beekeeping tasks in indoor apiary, Damien Madalena for the climate data, Michelle Wolfson for the flowers of the month, Alexandra Hutton for design, Alexandra Hutton and Lyn for photos, Kate Madalena, Damien Madalena, and Michelle Wolfson for editing, and Michelle Wolfson for posting on the UTBA site. I do hope that you take a good look at this calendar and that you do pick up a calendar or get one mailed to you. So here's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to be talking about early spring management. And so I want to make sure that you know that there are really 2 types of hive inspections for the spring. My references today are, just to let you know, my references today for this presentation are the Early Spring Management Checklist by the OBA, Spring Colony Management by the OBA, and Antibiotic Access Reasons for Beekeepers by the OBA. And OMAFA references about American foul brood and introduction to bee pests. So as we all know, our climate has been really unstable. Last Thursday, we had 17 degrees and it was beautiful. And the next day we had freezing rain and ice pellets. So you have to be very cautious to make sure that you have a good day to officially open your hives. But before that, you can do a non-invasive live dead bee kind of look on a sunny day at least 5 degrees. And you look for the bees flying. Are they taking any cleansing flights? Are they around the entrances? And note that opening a hive too early can really stress the beehive. A full inspection, the OBA says, wait until the temperatures are consistently around 15 degrees. The overnight temperatures are warmer. And that's when you take the frames out, inspect them for the queen, the eggs, the broods, and the signs of life, and signs of sort of starting to thrive. And then full inspection should never take place when the bees are clustered. Just a second here. 1 second here. I'm just adjusting slides. Just a second. Can we just take the slides and stuff here? Perfect. Thank you. So supplemental feeding in the spring. Assess the weight of the hives by lifting it. If the hives feel light, they may need supplemental feeding. Once the dandelion season starts, the bees will no longer need supplemental feeding and starvation is not a risk. Depending on the temperature, if it's still quite cold, use dry sugar and try and see if there's a water source nearby. Warmer temperatures, you can use an in-hive feeder, pail feeder, hive top feeder, baggy feeder with sugar solution 1:1. Barrel feeding is not recommended for the spring. And pollen substitutes, typically not necessary. Generally, they're used for purposes such as queen rearing, nuke production, intensive splitting, and commercial activities. What am I doing? Sorry, something's just, I'll just use that. Okay. This one here. So the one thing I want to talk about very briefly is American foul brood and prevention and management of that. From the take a look and read more about that from your Amafra site. Learn to recognize the signs and symptoms of foul brood. It's a disease that by law must be reported to the provincial apiary inspector. Hives with confirmed AFB must be burnt to prevent the spread of disease. So you really have to decide if you are going to preventatively apply oxytetracycline, an antibiotic for AFB, and more information about AFB and how to obtain the oxytetracycline is on the OBA website. But the important thing to remember, if you do decide to treat preventatively, that this treatment must be finished 4 weeks before the supers go on to prevent the contamination of honey. The other thing I'm going to talk about very briefly is Nazima, and it is an indicator of hive stress. It's a fungal disease that affects adult bees. Ontario has 2 different strains, Nazima apis and Nazima serena, and they're caused by spores. And it indicates that if there is Nazima, it is a stress disease, typically seen in the spring for 2 reasons. One of them, it's a fungal disease, such as, and it thrives in cold, damp spring conditions, which we can have, and spring is also a very stressful time for honeybee colonies. If a honeybee colony is experiencing other stressors, then the disease will flourish, but a healthy, well-fed colony can typically handle a Nazima infection and get over it without any help. But do try and learn more about Nazima from the Amafra site. There's the references I did use for tonight. There's the Honeybee Research Center at the University of Guelph, which has over 60 YouTube videos and other resources for beekeepers. So you could take a look at those. The good news is the OBA tech transfer spring beekeeping workshops for 2022 are back in person, and they are at various sites around the province. Check the OBA website for the locations and cost for the in-person courses. And they are conducted by our technical experts from the OBA Tech Transfer Center. 3 courses this year: Introduction to Beekeeping, Pest Management, and Queen Rearing. Also remember that the OBA has an online course that you can take, relatively reasonable at $85. Apiology 101, the online introductory beekeeping course, and Apiology 101, the second course, is online integrated pest management, and the sessions run once a month for 2 weeks. Great sort of hard copy resources: Dewey Caron's book, Honeykeeping Stories book, Keeping Honeybees, and the integrated pest management one. And my wish to you is be well and enjoy your bees.
Thanks, Marion. That was great. We're on to the Be Educated section of our meeting. We have Lyn Santos here with us today. Lyn is a trainer for beekeeping trainings and seminars under the Loyola Apiaries Private Technical School and running the Loyola Bee Farm with at least 400 colonies since it started in 2015 in the Philippines. And now with many colonies around different regions. She is a mother of 2 boys, married to Joel Santos, who is also a trainer beekeeper in the same institution. She has been teaching in the teaching profession for 26 years, and her passion for education led the couple to Canada with the mission of helping local beekeepers in the Philippines use their knowledge and skills in beekeeping and work abroad. Welcome, Lyn.
Hey, thank you so much, Lucy. And to start with my presentation, I'll be sharing with you now my screen. So I'll be presenting how beekeeping in the Philippines are being done, and also be touching about the Varroa mite and small hive beetle management, which is also being applied in the Philippines. So I'm very glad that I am a member and was given this chance by the UTBA. And this presentation is also dedicated and affiliated, especially with Loyola Apiary's Private Technical School, and also for the jail consultants, and most especially the Department of Agriculture or the Agricultural Training Institute. We are also a member of AAA, and also a member of Beekeepers Network Philippines Foundation Incorporated, and is also with the Department of Agriculture under RAPSI, Regional Agricultural Fishery and Council, and also with the Department of Tourism in the Philippines, and most of all, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. So to start with, I would like to introduce that beekeeping in the Philippines is spread all over its three parts, which is Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. So with its demographies, we have 17 regions and 81 provinces in the Philippines. And I got this source from the PSA. And all these 17 regions and 81 provinces, since Philippines is a tropical country, and there are lots of flowers and flower-bearing trees. So most specifically, you can visit Philippines and you can see bees around flying. And particularly, I would like to share with not only in Luzon and Visayas, but focused in beekeeping history in Mindanao. Beekeeping in the Philippines started in early 1904. And specifically in Mindanao, it started in 1980 when Epifanio Boy Loyola Jr. had his first colony and used his method on modern beekeeping, and later became Loyola Bee Farm, which made Mindanao as one of the pioneering region in beekeeping. So he is known to be by other beekeepers whom he have trained all over the world as the father of modern beekeeping in the Philippines. So Mr. Loyola and his other fellow founders organized the BNet, or what we call Beekeepers Network Philippines Foundation Incorporated in 1995. 1995, I mean. Now, in Mindanao, there are actually 6 major locations where most honeybees, like Apis mellifera, Apis florea, Apis cerana, and also the Apis dorsata and Breviligula, which is we consider giant bees, and our wild bees are endemic ones. And also the stingless bees, we have in the farm at least 9 species, and are commonly found in Mindanao. It is because it is near to the Indonesian and Malaysian islands. And the climate in Mindanao during May is the hottest month, with an average temperature of 28.5 degrees Celsius or 83 degrees Fahrenheit. That's quite hot. And the coldest is in January at 26.5 degrees Celsius or 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And these are the actual pictures that we have taken. So this one is the Apis dorsata, where it's one of the giant bees we call, and it's pure black. And this is the Apis breviligula, where it's also a wild giant bee, but is made up of white and black stripes. So that is how we identify them. Also, we also have Apis florea, or the dwarf bees, or the red bees. It's not only found in Middle East, but also it became a little bit acquainted with the Philippines because it's a hot country. And we also have the Apis cerana, where we consider as a honey rubber. That's why we never mix the colonies in the apiary site with cerana and with the ones that we have is Apis mellifera. So this is not endemic in the Philippines because it's a European bee, but started 1980s. This has become exported to the Philippines, and it's being cultured, and now it's everywhere. You can find every apiary sites in the Philippines with Apis mellifera. And also we have the stingless bees, and at the Loyola Bee Farm, we have 9 species of stingless bees. So why is it that particularly we stayed in Mindanao and reared at least 400 colonies or more and spread it out from 4 regions, region 9, 10, 11, and 12. It is because all over Mindanao, you will see different kinds and large and vast of flower farms. So we have the Vow Flower Farm, we have the Eden's Flower Farm, the Kinawe, the Mount Matutum, the mountains is has in its foot all over. There are all plenty of flowers. And aside from that, the main reason why we can maintain our honeys as well is that because we also have flower bearing trees in Mindanao. So number 1 is Katmon or Delenia philippinensis. So this is the one, and then the Bani, and then also the Nara, the Molave, the Ilang-ilang, Banaba, then the Malabulak, the Dap-dap, and also the Salingbubog. So I have taken this one in the Selenism as my source. And aside from that, Philippines joins and promotes beekeeping in various festivals and conferences to promote the native honeybee products from Philippines, and also sharing our apiculture education in supporting pollination, climate change, health benefits, especially during pandemic, and also livelihood programs for local farmers and beekeepers, most especially the IPs or the indigenous people that we have. So recently, Sir Boy Loyola or the Loyola Bee Farm have represented in Honey and Milk International Virtual Festival in 2021. And we are the only country who presented, institution who presented Philippines out of among the European countries and the other side of the world. So these are the example of our cultured honey products. So these are our harvested honey from our different apiary sites in Mindanao, and this is from Apis mellifera. For these ones, the black one, the dark one, these are the wild honey that we have coming from the Apis dorsata and from our stingless bees. And then we also have this beeswax and then the honey soap. So we have made that one, and I hope that I can also make a sample of honey soap here in Toronto. So just to share some of our apiary sites in Mindanao. So this is how we do beekeeping and safekeeping the farms and exploring the flower bearing trees all over Mindanao. So these are our beekeepers, and some of them are our trainee beekeepers. And also the pictures that is shown here are representing the different regions where the colonies of Loyola Bee Farm are located. So it is scattered all over the 4 regions, and these are all our beekeepers, alternately doing the beekeeping and being led by yours truly and my husband, Sir Joel. So most recently, the one that we are kind of different in the Philippines is because we're conducting bee lining. So these bee lining projects is being sponsored by Department of Environment and Natural Resources, and also from the Department of Agriculture, which is, we usually conduct this at Mount Hamigitan in 2021, and it is one of the World Heritage Site of UNESCO. So this is our advocacy as well for the environmental and agricultural programs, and also for the preservation of natural habitats. And aside from that, with the government, we also work with the request of the schools. So Waldorf School is one of the private school that is teaching bee education. So we also conduct training with their instructors, and so also involving the students how to do the beelining. And this one is an example of Api serrana, where we can just found everywhere because the area is very forested and is very rich with vegetation. And for this one, this is the beelining for our stingless bees colonies, the Tetragonal aberoi. So what we normally do is we try to educate the people, even in the community, most especially the IPs or the indigenous people, to secure the wild habitat and preserve the natural habitat of the bees so that they will not be ruined or destroyed by the predators. So we are teaching them how to do the hive boxes and how to safe keep these colonies. And also sharing our beekeeping calendar in the Philippines, though for quite some times the temperature changes and also the climate change. But most probably from January to March, this is what we consider honey flow in the Philippines. And we do hive management twice a week and harvest once a week. In the month of April, May to June, we consider it the summertime where it's very hot, and hive management twice a week. Check for summer predators, harvest once a month. In the month of July, August to September, it's considered rainy season. So we conduct hive management once a week, check for rainy predators, artificial feeding once a week, no harvest. For October to December, we're preparing for the honey flow. So hive management once a week, check for any predators, and then harvest once a month. And for the predators that we are preparing for by season of honeybees in the Philippines, so yeah, for during summer, we always have the killer bees, the hornets, and the wasps. And during summer or rainy, yes, most of them, the crab spiders, and also the praying mantis and the kissing bug. And then during summer, ants. The ants is our number one enemy and predator, especially in the farm, because they have this strategic kind of thing that they can really colonize the whole colony of our honeybees. And for the honey flow, our number one predators are the birds. So we have this Philippine swift, and most especially this pirik or the what we call the blue-tethered bird, where they can really swiftly eat 5 honeybees in 1 minute. So we have innovated something like putting compact disc just hang nearby the colony, so that if they see any movement, then these birds won't really go nearby the colonies. And also during the rainy season, we have frogs and toads. And for the hive management practices applied in the Philippines, we always follow OBA. So these are the inspection list that a checklist that we are using for beehive inspection, and we do that every time we are conducting the hive management. So the general hive appearance, the reproduction, and we are putting hive 1 and how many hives there could be, and then the signs of pests, the capacity, and also the weather condition. So that's the one we are following in the farm. And for the small hive beetle and Varroa mite management in the Philippines, I would like to share with you, maybe this is quite different, but how we would know that there is a Varroa mite infestation in our colony. So this is the actual picture that we took. So we, aside from seeing it with our bare eyes that there are some Varroa mites on our bees, what we do is, if we have seen one and we suspect the colony to be infested, so what we normally do is doing the applying sugar shaking method to check if Varroa is present. And then if the 10 framer colony has 4 framer, we only put half of the strip of the Apivar or the Apistan, because based on our experience, if it's only 4 framer or 5 framers, and then we put the whole strip, and then the bees cannot really sustain the dosage or the efficacy of the strip. So if it's more than 8 or 10 framers, and then Varroa mite infestation is there, so we put the whole strip. So what else do we do? So if we have determined and put the strip, so for those who are not infected colonies, for the healthy colonies, so what we do is to isolate, and then we relocate them in our other apiary sites. So this is what we do, and then there is where we conduct our inspection. So once on the first colony we have determined that there is a Varroa mite infection, then we do not open the rest of the colonies within the area. So how about small hive beetle infestation? So in our farm, because we also culture stingless bees, so what we do is whenever we are in the area of the stingless bees boxes, so what we do is we check the 4 corners. If the corners of the box are dripping or leaking of honey, then we're very sure that there is infestation. So what we do is we open the box and then check if the envelope is broken. So if it looks like this, so the envelope is broken. So what we do is we slice it, and then we open the envelope down to the cerumen or its middle part, and even go down up to the bottom end, just to make sure. And then after that, if the full box is really infected, including to the bottom end, then we suspect that the rest can be infected. So what do? Automatically, we burn the box, the infested box, right away. And whatever tools we used, so we are also burning it with that box. And then we go back to the area and then dig 6 inches below the area where leak box was found. So these practices is our experiment and our experience and our own practice. So we did not get any observations or any information from any other apiary sites or beekeepers. So this is our own experimentation in our farm. So what we did, we dig 6 inches below the area where leak box was found, because the leaked honey, we found out that when the honey leaked, and when it reaches the ground, the egg starts to grow, and then they start to have their colony there. So when we dig up to 6 inches, a lot of small hive beetle is there. So what we do, we pour gasoline as necessary to wet the ground surrounding the infected area and let it absorb. So we let it stay and absorb the soil for about 1 to 2 hours. And then after that, we put rice hull to cover the infected area. So since we have the straw bales, and then we burn them, and so we put the rice hull on top. So the hot temperature created by the rice hull combined with the gasoline that we put on top of it surely kills the small hive beetles, including their eggs. So lastly, what we do is to isolate the other remaining boxes to avoid infestation from other boxes, and then check the area after a month. And then luckily, based on our experience, after a month, so it looks like this. So the small hive beetle is gone. So that's how we do in the Philippines. And thank you so much. I'm Lyn Santos, a beekeeper from Loyola Bee Farm. Thank you for giving me this chance to share beekeeping in the Philippines.
Thank you, Lyn. If anybody has any questions for Lyn, please put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask some questions.
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Hey, Lyn.
Yep.
You said during the January, February season, you were harvesting once a week. Are you
Yes, sir.
harvesting from the brood box, or do you actually have honey supers like we do here?
We
in
do have
America?
honey super. We do have the honey super. So it's like from the preparation from October, November, December. So we're backwarding. We already have prepared that for the honey flow. So we already have this honey super. So it's January, February, March. We just harvest.
Like once a week. So they must be producing a fair bit of honey then.
Yes, actually, there are lots of honeys. Yes, and we are actually we're looking forward to export. But the thing is, due to pandemic, that is why. But we got tons of harvested honeys, and we are also supplying the other parts of the Philippines from Mindanao.
Do you know what an average colony will produce?
Actually, for us, even just for one frame, as both sides from the other side only, if we wait, because we weight it by side, say one frame, on the other side it's 1.5 kilos if it's 100% on the other side, and then the other side also 1.5. So average is 3 kilos to 4 kilos in a frame, in one frame.
Oh.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, because there are really lots of flowers there in Mindanao, unlike in the other parts of the Philippines. So the vegetation is really good, really fresh.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another question. How does the honey vary from the European bee to the giant bee to the stingless bee?
Yes.
Do they tend to go for the same flowers or different flowers?
Actually, they can go to the same flowers, but on the other hand, they produce, say for example, for the giant bees, or what we call dorsata or breviligula, they can produce more of the honey because they have a bigger honey stomach, and they can forage, let us say 8 to 10 kilometers. Now here comes mellifera. So we know that Apis mellifera is a very industrious kind of honeybees. And so if compared to their honey stomach, although smaller compared to the giant bees or the Apis dorsata, still they can fly up to 5 to 8 kilometers. So they still have this honey. And with the stingless bees, because they are very tiny, so of course it will take 3 to 6 months before they can fill their box, and then sometimes it takes 10 months to 1 year before we can harvest. So the color of the honey varies depending, and also the taste depending on the type of flowers they forage to.
So you don't find there's a difference in taste just because of the
There
different
is
bee?
actually there is a difference in the taste, most specifically with the area or the apiary site where we locate. As an example, we are supplying at least 100 colonies before in one of the pineapple farm or manufacturing in the Philippines. If you have heard about Dole Philippines and Del Monte Philippines, so it's a pineapple supplier. So the honey there coming produced by the Apis mellifera really tastes like pineapple. It's really sweet. Yeah. So, and
But
even
do you find a difference between the different types of
yes,
bees?
there is, ma'am. Also with if it's the stingless bees, if they're the forage area that they can fly, if they're under the coconut tree, and it's really sweet. And for the Apis dorsata, because they are wild and they can fly far further, so it's a mixture. But most of it, the honey color that they produce is really black and very sticky. Unlike with the Apis mellifera, it's quite golden. But it depends as well where we locate them. Say if it's pineapple, it's pineapple. If it's cassava, then sometimes it tastes like bitter. So if it's with the mango or if it's with the nara, it really depends. The taste differs. It has a difference. It's
And
not the same.
okay, we were hoping that you might have some honey. So if we can finally get together and do a honey tasting, that you might be able to bring some.
I will request if they can send over from Philippines coming here so that we can have a taste of it. But in the farm every 3 months, it's like our buyers, most especially the elderly and the pregnant and the children, they would really love buying to us January to March. because it's the month where sunflower really blooms because it's summer, so it's really tasty. Now for some, and they would buy panic buy because they knew that here comes rainy season, and then the taste of the honey is bitter, and sometimes we have encountered that the partly of the frame of the honey on top of it is green and down golden yellow and then light yellow. So it's really, really amazing how, these bees can really make those kind of linear and how do you call that combination of the color of the honeys? And I said, oh, it's really true that there's a green honey, but when you mix them and when you filter them, of course, it's still golden yellow. It will never be green.
Okay, Michelle said, I'm so impressed with all of the native honeybees. I feel sad that we only have one species here. Do they have similar husbandry practices such as and swarming prevention and splitting? How does that work with you with all the different types of bees?
Actually, in our farm, we do have 9 species, but before we left the Philippines, we lost the 3 species that we're really taking care of. So with yes, they have the same husbandry, ma'am. But with regards to Tetragonella beroi, it is the one that we can produce more of the honey because it's very easy to rear compared to other species. And beroi, we can find it when we conduct beelining. It is just hiding among the trees. So most of the time when we conduct beelining, it's Tetragonella beroi. And when we split them, rough estimate after 3 months, when their involucrum is already full, and when we put the second box on top, and when they accept and make on top, then that's the time that we knew that we can split it. They make their own queens.
Is there any one species that you like working with better than another?
Actually, aside from Tetragonella beroi, there is the other species that it's really hard to pronounce, but it's kind of like it has this bubble, it has these pearls, so it's very easy to divide. And since stingless bees, they can make their own queens. So in the spiral, I am much more in love with beroi. So if they have this spiral 4, 5, or 6, we knew that we can split them, because we knew that in every spiral and in every edge of it, there is a princess. So when you divide them, then they can make their own queen. So it's not as necessary as mellifera that we need drones, and or queen rear. So yeah, beroi is mostly the ones that we culture because there's no capital for that. It's inexpensive. If you do beelining, you can just see them and capture them or preserve them. So yeah, so beroi is our specialty. I would be sharing some of the species that we have. It's just that I wasn't able to touch that one and put it on the screen and in the presentation because their names are really hard to pronounce.
Michelle also asked, could you conduct a beelining class here for us?
Yes, I would love to. Actually, it's very, very exciting. And based on my knowledge, in the Philippines, we are the only ones conducting the beelining. So it's very challenging. It's because you are putting the bait and inviting the bees, and you would really determine where they're coming from. So for us, it's our one way of strategy where we can find the colony of the bees that just hiding around. because when you put the bait or the honey, then they would go for it. And then it's really, really amazing, Lucy, when you see that, they go back and forth. And then later, here comes 10, here comes the 100, and then you can really see the bee lining, literally. It's really amazing.
Sounds really interesting.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
I'll have to try and set something up this summer if everything goes
sure,
okay.
sure. Yeah, we'd love to do that, me and Sir Joel. Yeah.
Okay, that is those are our first two presentations. We are going to come back with Tom Nolan talking all about Varroa. We'll take a 10-minute break so everybody can settle in and get ready for his presentation. We'll be back at 7:21. The original founder of the UTBA. He's the owner of Hivetown Honey, which I believe is based in Scarborough. And we are very fortunate to have him here tonight. Tom is at the heartbeat of current beekeeping. He travels all over North America, attending conferences. So we know that we're getting the most current information that we can from him. And we're super happy to have him here today to talk to us about all things Varroa. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Lucy. I'm going to go ahead and try and share my screen here. Lucy, are you seeing it in presenter view?
Not in presenter view.
So you just see the one slide? Oh, that's so
Right.
cool.
I've got your whole screen up. There we go. You're good.
There we go. Okay. Oh, it's changing by itself. I don't know why. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope everyone is sort of, I'm assuming, chomping at a bit like me, dying to get into our bees. It's weather's getting warmer. I'm seeing cleansing flights, but still haven't managed to pull any frames yet. Yeah, so tonight we're going to talk about Varroa, sort of how to monitor for Varroa and treating for Varroa and what our options are. Sorry, I'm just having some issues with my computer. Sorry. Okay, yeah. So just a little quick background on me. I guess I'm a hobby sideliner beekeeper. I tend to think of myself as a hobby beekeeper, but I guess maybe I'm a sideliner. I've got 4 bee yards, and we have we went into winter with 50 colonies this year. We lost 6, so we're still doing okay. Bees are looking pretty good. The photo you're looking at here is rooftop apiary on the left, University of Toronto, Scarborough. The one on the bottom right is my main yard, which is out by the Toronto Zoo. And the top left is a yard out by Uxbridge area, which is an apple orchard, which gets some really interesting honey. Yeah, so we manage our bees organically, although we can't claim organic honey. Been keeping bees for, I guess, about 11 years or so. We most of these colonies, these 50 colonies I have, originated from 4 nukes. They're split, so I haven't bought bees in years. The last couple of, I'm going to take my headset off because it's driving me crazy. Can you guys still hear me? Lucy, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, you're good.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so in the last couple of years, while doing all those splits, I was buying queens, and for the last 2 years, we've been grafting and raising our own queens and starting to get a little more proficient at that. So my hope tonight is that by the end of this meeting, if you don't already believe it, you'll come to the conclusion that it's really important to learn how to manage and monitor for Varroa. I think it's clearly the biggest threat we face as an industry here in Canada. So why manage for Varroa? Public enemy number 1, not me, the Varroa mites. That's my, for those of you who have never monitored for Varroa, that's how small they are. That's Varroa in a sample of an alcohol wash, which we'll talk about later. Ernesto Guzman, who's a professor at the University of Guelph, did a pretty lengthy research study back in 2010 which they were really looking at high colony losses here in Ontario. We were averaging over 40% losses. And, they looked at everything. They looked at pesticides, neonicotinoids, Varroa, and he came to the conclusion that the number one reason for colony loss is Varroa Destructor and the inability to manage for Varroa properly. I think it was true then. And if you look at any of the current videos from the University of Guelph Honeybee Research Center, you'll see that Professor Guzman claims it is still true today. And I tend to believe with him. It's not just the Varroa mites that do the damage to our colonies, but it's the viruses that they spread and they pass along. Just a little tidbit of information is the average healthy summer bee will live on average about 30 days. But a honeybee that has the form wing virus or any other virus is pretty much reduced down to between 14 and 18 days. So their lifespan is pretty much cut in half. So it's critical that we keep our colonies as healthy as possible, and Varroa is a good place to start. So, how often should we monitor for Varroa? OMAFRA, who's the Ontario Ministry of Agricultural Affairs and Rural Farm and Rural Affairs, says minimum twice a year, so spring and late summer. The Honeybee Health Coalition says we should monitor for Varroa at least 4 times a year. And Michigan State University, whose apiculture program is run by Dr. Megan Milbrath, claims that we should be monitoring at least once a month during the beekeeping season. And I tend to lean towards monitoring once a month. That's what I do. So to me, that's ideal. Monitoring 4 times a year is pretty darn good. If you're monitoring twice a year, not good enough, because a lot can happen between the spring and late summer. And when you do that all-call wash in late summer, sometimes you can be really shocked from the difference from your initial monitoring to your late season monitoring. The other thing I want to say too, before we get too far along, is that I got a lot of text tonight, not a lot of photos, couldn't be text heavy. But I also want this also to be a conversation. So if anybody has questions and wants to jump in, we don't have to wait till the end, as long as we don't get too derailed and we stay on topic, but definitely open for questions. You can drop in a chat and Lucy can let me know, or you can put the hand up for questions. I'm happy to stop anytime and engage in questions or comments. Yeah, so different methods of monitoring for mites. I listed 3. You've maybe heard of others. You may have heard of well, I can't remember what it is because I never do it. But the main three methods are the all-call wash, the sugar shake, and a sticky board method. And we'll talk about some of the pros and cons both. I think the most important thing to note is none of these methods are perfect. They're actually just give us a small representation of what's really happening, because once one understands the reproductive cycle of the varroa mites and honeybees, and you understand population dynamics, you'll know that any sample that you take from mites, whether it's an all-call wash, a sugar shake, or the natural drop on a sticky board, is a small representation, because a majority of mites are under the brood cap. 80% of the mites in your hive are under the cap. So what you're looking at is a really small representation. The pros to the all-call wash is, one, it's the most accurate. It's one visit to the bee yard, you get your results immediately. The cons are you're going to kill 300 bees. A lot of people, you'll hear the sort of the analogy that it's kind of like a biopsy. You take a small skin biopsy to, to save the body. I think we've rationalized our way around it. The way I look at it is, in any beekeeping course, we always tell new beekeepers that a queen can lay anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000 eggs a day. What we never mention is how many bees we actually lose a day. And we're probably losing about 1,000 bees a day, bees just aging out or bees not making it back to the hive. So in the realm of things, 300 bees is a very small number for an average hive that could have anywhere from 40 to 60,000 bees in it. So anyways, that's how I rationalize the all-call wash. It's my preferred method. Second choice would be the sugar shake. The pros are it's a non-lethal, one visit to the bee yard. The results are a little more variable. And the variable results really come from the fact that humidity plays a lot to do with it. If the sugar clumps up or there's a lot of nectar when you shake your bees, it could throw your number off. So if you are going to do the sugar shake, it's usually easier, a little more accurate in the spring. We're going to look at some video after of doing both methods, but again, it's non-lethal, so you're not going to kill your bees. You can put the bees back in a hive, but if you were to do a sugar shake and an alcohol wash next to each other, typically the sugar shake numbers will be a little bit lower. We'll get into that a little later. The sticky board method, and if some of you don't know these methods, we're going to see them in a video, and we'll go back over them. But the sticky board method is basically using screen bottom boards, putting a monitoring board under the screen with some type of sticky on it, so that when the mites fall, they stick to the board. You're taking a 24-hour representation. You'll get a much better accurate count if you do it over a 3-day period. The pros are, again, non-lethal. You can also use this to monitor treatments. I do this all the time myself. When I put my Formic Pro in or oxalic acid, I'll go back the next day just to see what dropped. And you can do it for a longer period. The cons with this method is it's 2 trips to the bee yard. Results can be variable based on the size of the colony. Also based on the behavior of the colony. Some colonies are actually more hygienic than others. This one, the sticky board for me is, it's contentious because it's taught here by the tech transfer team. Members of the tech transfer team like this method. Paul Kelly at the Ontario Beekeeping or Honeybee Health Center, he likes that method. I remember listening to a presentation from Dr. Samuel Ramsey, who many of you know, and he made the comment in one of his presentations that monitoring mites by natural mite fall through a sticky board is not a very effective method, because he jokingly said the brightest and the best don't fall. What are falling are older mites, and young healthy mites, they're hanging on and they don't accidentally fall off. So, but again, if you're doing this method, you do it regularly and you follow the protocol, it will give you an indication. And that's one thing, whatever method you're doing, if you do it regularly and consistently, it will give you some data so you can make treatment decisions. If you are going to treat, it's always a good idea to sample from your strong hives. If you got a couple of hives, if you have less than 10 hives, I would say sample them all. If you've, once you got several yards, you're looking at, at least, 5% of your overall colonies. But if I got a big, strong colony yard, I'm always going to sample the big, strong colonies, because although we look at them and we think, great, there's a big, booming, healthy colony, more bees, more brood means more mites. So these are the ones I look for and the ones I sample from. We're also, when we're choosing to sample, we should be sampling from the brood nest, not from honey supers. Mites reproduce under the brood cap. Typically, mites don't crawl into the brood cap until they're about to be capped over. So if I was going through my colony and I pulled out a frame and queen had just laid up that whole frame full of eggs, I would not sample that frame. I'd be looking for a frame that had some brood that looks like it was just about to be capped over. I would be sampling from those frames. That's typically where the bees that have the mites on them are going to be hanging out. And again, this is kind of what they look like for someone who has not seen mites. And for a lot of you here tonight, this will be review. For some, it won't be. So again, anytime with the questions. So, whoops, we're going to do a video here. It's about 5 minutes, and then we'll do some discussion after the video.
Varroa mite populations can grow rapidly, so you should sample at least 4 times a year. Sampling is most critical following population peak and during the population decrease phase. Be sure to sample again after completing each treatment to make sure that the treatment you selected was effective. This video will show you 2 sampling methods step by step: the powdered sugar shake method and the alcohol or soap wash method. Both methods remove mites from the bodies of adult bees, so you can determine the number of mites per 100 adult bees. This is the infestation percentage. If you have fewer than 10 colonies, sample all colonies each time you sample. For larger apiaries, sample 8 randomly selected colonies. If you have multiple apiaries, randomly select 3 to 5% of your total colonies to sample. For both sampling methods, you will need a wide-mouthed jar marked with a line indicating 1/2 cup, a solid lid, a lid with number 8 screen mesh, and a white plate or container. Some beekeeping supply companies sell sampling kits with all the equipment you will need. The only safety equipment you'll need is standard beekeeping protective gear. For the powdered sugar shake method, you will also need powdered sugar and a spray mister filled with water. For the alcohol or soap wash method, you will need alcohol, such as ethanol, ethyl alcohol, isopropyl, or rubbing alcohol, or low sudsing liquid soap, such as automotive windshield washer fluid. For both methods, the first step is to collect the bee sample. To sample a hive, open it and select a brood frame. Look for the queen. If she's present, move her to another frame or set the frame with queen aside. You'll need a sample of about 300 bees. This is a 1/2 cup of lightly packed bees. Collect the sample by tilting the frame slightly and moving the jar downward over the adult bees so they fall into the jar. Or shake bees from 2 or 3 brood frames into a larger collecting container. Then scoop a 1/2 cup of bees and dump them into the jar. For the powdered sugar shake method, add approximately 2 tablespoons of powdered sugar to the jar. Then roll and shake sample for the same length of time. With the sugar dusting, dislodges mites from the bodies of the bees. Next, shake the jar like a salt shaker onto the white plate or container. You can repeat the process to improve or verify the accuracy of your count. Add another tablespoon of sugar. Shake again for 1 minute or more. Wait another 3 to 5 minutes, and shake the mites onto the same plate or container as the original sample. High humidity may cause sugar clumping, which can cause some mites to stick in sugar coating at the bottom, reducing the accuracy of the count. Spray the collecting tray with water to dissolve the powdered sugar. Following this, you can return the sampled bees to the hive. This method does not harm them. For the alcohol or soap wash method, take the sample jar away from the colony. Using alcohol around a hot smoker can be dangerous. Add enough alcohol or soap to completely cover the bee sample. Close the jar and shake it vigorously for at least 1 minute. Shaking the liquid dislodges the mites from the bodies of the bees. For consistent results, shake each sample for the same length of time. With a 2-jar sampling device, vigorously wash the bees, drain the liquid through the sample, and count mites. If using a single jar, shake the bees, then pour the liquid containing the mites onto a white plate or tray. Or pour liquid and bees through any filter that separates the bees and mites. The white tray allows you to see and count the mites. Repeat the wash to confirm or improve the accuracy of your count. Add more alcohol or soap to the jar and shake again for the same length of time. This method kills the bees sampled. To preserve the bees, use the powdered sugar shake method. With both methods, count the total number of mites removed from the sample. Divide that number by 300 or by the actual number of bees in the sample if you counted them. This yields the mite level at
I think we lost audio there, Tom. It might just be my internet.
No, Tom is on mute. If he unmutes, you can hear.
Further controls are not
Sorry.
needed at this time. Controls may be needed, or controls are needed now. In general, mite levels below 2% indicate that controls are not needed immediately. Levels above 3% indicate that controls should be applied. Specific thresholds vary according to the colony's developmental phase. See the Tools for Varroa Management guide for more detailed information on how to interpret your sampling results. Other videos in this series demonstrate how and when to use different Varroa controls. As part of an integrated pest management program, both the powdered sugar shake and alcohol or soap wash sampling methods can give you an accurate picture of Varroa mite levels in your colonies. Remember to sample at least 4 times a year, especially from July through October. Sample again within 1 week after completing control treatments, and use the sampling technique consistently. Thanks for watching this video from the Honeybee Health Coalition. Visit honeybeehealthcoalition.org and download the Tools for Varroa Management guide, which has more detailed information on all the topics in this video series. All videos are provided free of charge, and we encourage you to share them.
Having a problem getting out of this video. Okay, here we go. Okay, so a couple of things from the video. The method of collecting the bees. If you notice, she did what I call the scrape the bees off the frame method, where she used her her jar and pulled it down the frame of bees. I've done that. Not really a big fan of that. I think it might be a little more intimidating for a new beekeeper to do that. I like the shaking the bees off the frame into a, I don't use a 5-gallon bucket like that. I use that little square rectangular Rubbermaid dish basin, which works quite well. And then I just sort of wait a second and let the older foragers fly back to the hive and collect my sample from the nurse bees. Yeah, here's kind of a photo of my method. I do the alcohol wash. I use the double shaker. This is my little Rubbermaid bin that I shake the bees into. I buy those shakers in the bee supply store. They're about 20, 22 bucks, depending where you buy them. I found these in the US at the Dollar Tree for $2, except they had no holes. So I drilled holes in them. I got a bunch of them that I brought back, but you can find those at the dollar store. I thought that was pretty cool. Okay, so we did our mite check. Do we need to treat for Varroa? Do we have the appropriate personal protective equipment to do our treatments? Does anybody, before we move on to treating, does anybody, I'm just looking in the chat here. Does anybody have sorry, I'm having a problem seeing the chat. Does anybody have any questions before we move on?
Yes, I do. I did add it in the chat, Tom. It's Henry. I was just wondering, I've always been taking the sample from emerging brood, but you're saying that I should be doing it before it's capped. So does that mean I should be looking for sort of like the larva stage?
Yeah, well, see, you know, Varroa mites, they don't see, they don't have eyes, they're blind, right? So they go by pheromone. So Varroa mites do not crawl on inside the cell until our larva is about to be capped over, right? So they know it's older larva. So that's typically where your mites are going to be on the bees on those frames. But again, I still think it's not a bad idea to, I get lazy sometimes, to be honest, because I do a lot of washes. So I'll find a frame that I think is an appropriate frame where the larva is about to be capped over. But like in the video she mentioned, which I think is a good practice, is to sample from a couple of different frames in the brood box. I don't always do that myself, but I think it's a good practice. Does that answer your question, Henry?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Thanks.
Okay. So, whoops. Okay, so Amafra's recommendation for the all-call wash in May is 2 mites per 100 bees, which is lower than the Honeybee Health Coalition treatment threshold we just saw in the video. In this particular example, I would go with Amafra. Yeah, I'm treating it 2 mites myself in May. They say 3, but 2. So that's for the all-call wash method. If you notice here with the sugar roll method, I have a question mark. And when you go to the Amafra treatment recommendation guide and their recommended methods for monitoring, you won't find the sugar roll there. And that may tell you something, that Amafra doesn't support the sugar roll method. So some people say that you should adjust your number for the sugar roll to be slightly lower than the all-call wash treatment threshold. Hard to comment because I don't use it, but something to be aware of. The sticky board method, you're measuring a 24-hour drop. It's recommended to really do it over a 3-day period. So if you did that in May and you pulled your board out, 72 hours later, and you saw 40 mites on there, you would divide by 3, and you'd see you got 13 mites in a 24-hour period. So it's time to treat. So again, but whatever method you're doing, it should do consistently and do the same methods. Just because I don't do the sticky board, I know a lot of beekeepers who do it. That's their method. It works for them. I don't get hung up on do it my way just because I prefer the alcohol wash. If the win for me is if you monitor, whether it's sugar roll, alcohol wash, sticky board, just monitor for mites and find something that you're comfortable doing. Okay, so we do our alcohol wash or our sticky board, and we realize we're over the threshold, so we gonna treat. So what are our options? There are different methods of Varroa control. You'll often see it presented in the form of a pyramid with integrated pest management, with cultural controls at the bottom, working up to mechanical controls, working up to natural compounds, and then worst case scenario using synthetic compounds. I'm no longer a fan of integrated pest management. I think that Varroa is such a destructive pest that it should be dealt with effectively, and that could mean using several of these different methods at the same time in conjunction with one another. I don't do the start with the cultural controls and work up. So let's look at some of the cultural controls. So for cultural controls, we were looking at brood breaks. or resistant stock, hygienic stock. The ORBS is the Ontario Resistant Honeybee Selection Program, where we have a group of breeders here in Ontario who are trying to breed hygienic bees. There's also people who breed other types of there's other breeding programs, but it is a good choice if you can buy locally adapted hygienic stock if it's available in your area. Brood breaks, and what we mean by brood breaks is splitting our colonies. And what's happening when we do a brood break? If we have a large colony that's got enough bees that, you know, you're doing two things. You could be preventing swarming, but by also splitting that colony, you're splitting it in half, and you can make this part of a cultural varroa control if you do not introduce a mated queen. If you let that colony raise its own queen, or if you give that colony a queen cell, there's going to be a break in the reproductive cycle, and which will slow down the development of the mites in those colonies. But, you know, a lot of people will split a colony, introduce a mated queen, where so the brood break is such a short period that it's probably not going to have a big effect. So just to be conscious of that. Like a brood break is usually a break and brood, which means no laying queen. So you're going to introduce a virgin queen, a queen cell, or let the colony raise its own queen. Mechanical controls can basically be mite trapping, or what some people call drone trapping, and use of screen bottom boards. But again, the screen bottom board one is questionable. Many of you may have used these, some may be aware of these. The beekeeping supply stores sell a plastic green frame where the cells are larger. So when you put these frames into your colonies, the bees, when they dry out the frames, dry out the wax, they're going to make them larger. They're going to make them the size of drones. So because varroa mites prefer drone brood over worker brood, your mites will majority of your mites, not all, majority of them will be inside these drone frames. It can be a great tool used properly. It can be a nightmare if you don't use it properly, because if you don't take them out before the brood emerges, you now have a mite factory in your colony. So you would take those frames out, freeze them, feed them to your chickens, but you know, getting the mites out of frames before they go back into your colonies. Another method that some people do is if you're running deep frames in a brood box, you could insert one medium frame, and typically the bees will build comb off the bottom of that frame, and that comb will, not always, but 99% of the time, be drone brood, and to put the drones there, and you can again scrape that off the bottom of the frame. We often hear screen bottom boards are a good method of, you know, catching the natural mite fall of the varroa that falls naturally. I say this one is questionable because I've heard so much research where, and I go back to Dr. Samuel Ramsey on this one. He says the brightest and the best don't fall off the bees. They are on there for life. The sick, dying varroa are the ones that are falling off. But again, in conjunction with drone trapping and treatments and splitting, if it helps a little bit incremental, why not? But I would not rely on either of these methods. Another challenge with the mite trapping or the drone trapping is, again, drones are, this is a method that you would use in the spring, early summer, because once we get into late summer and fall, your colony stops raising drones. You're going to have very few drones. So again, a good tool in the spring, early summer. Okay, so, and then we've got, as far as treatments go, organic compounds. Here in Ontario, we have registered treatments, and I'm going to talk primarily about registered treatments. There's a lot of other things that people are putting in their hives that are not registered, and I'm not going to speak on those. We've got 65% liquid formic acid, Formic Pro, which is a formulated formic acid, Thymovar, Apivar, which is new to Canada. It's been available in the US, but we just got registration here in Canada, so people may be only seeing it for the first time this year. We've got HopGuard 2, We've got oxalic acid trickle or the dribble method. And we've got the oxalic acid, which some people call sublimation and some people call vaporization. There's a debate on whether it's really sublimated or vaporized. I just say vaporization. And we'll talk a little bit about the pros and cons of these organic methods. And just like the synthetic compounds, there's pros and cons to everything. And a message I always say to beekeepers is that as beekeepers, we have a responsibility that one of these products may be our favorite product, but every one of them has pros and cons and shortcomings. And you may love Thymovar, but there's a time you're not going to be able to use it. Or you may love Formic Pro, but there's a time you're not going to be able to use it. So as beekeepers, it's really incumbent on us that we know what the options are. We know what the products are. So when we know we can't use this one, this is our other option. Okay, so 65% liquid formic acid. It's a fumigant, which means it's basically a vapor. It should be used between 10 and 30 degrees Celsius. The only really pro to using 65 liquid formic acid is it's inexpensive because it's a DIY product, which means you got to make it yourself, re-soak pads, and it's a little complicated. And if you want to know more about this, Omafra has the recipe and how to do it. The cons on liquid formic acid is you cannot use this while the honey supers are on. It also requires multiple applications. It also has the potential to trigger super seizure. Formic acid will do that. I really don't think that's really so much of a con. What's really happening there, if anyone's not familiar with that, is a young, healthy queen that is well mated puts out a pheromone scent, and the colony knows they've got a good queen. They smell that pheromone, they spread it around. As a queen gets older, she gets into her second and third year, that pheromone scent gets weaker and weaker, and the colony knows that she's aging out, and they quite often will just replace her. Sometimes this happens and you don't even realize it happens. This is a natural process. What happens with older queens or poorly mated queens is when you introduce formic acid into the hive, this could trigger a super seizure where they think the queen is aging out and they replace her. I don't really view that as such a terrible thing because it was probably going to happen anyways. I've been using formic too long to really be concerned about that. Again, liquid formic acid, dangerous. You're mixing a liquid that's corrosive that can burn your skin. So you need protective gloves, protective eyewear, long sleeves, long pants. Personally, I don't know why anyone would want to use liquid formic acid when we have formulated formic acid products, which we'll talk about. And I should back up just to disclose, many of you know, and I should disclose this because I do work for Not Apiary Products, the manufacturer of Formic Pro, and we sell Formic Pro and liquid formic acid. So just for disclosure, clearly I may be biased here. But the active ingredient in Formic Pro is formic acid. Again, like the liquid, it's a fumigant. It's best used between 10 and 30 degrees Celsius. The pros with this one, unlike the DIY product, and many people confuse this, is this one you can use with your honey supers on. The liquid formic acid you cannot. With Formic Pro, there are two treatment options. Option one is 2 strips for 14 days. This is the preferred option. The option 2 is 1 strip for 10 days and a second strip for another 10 days for a total of 20 days. Many people believe these are 2 equal options. They are not. Option 1, the 2 strips for 14 days, this option will kill mites, penetrate the brood cap, kill mites below the cap. If you're using the second option on Formic Pro, what I call the 1+1 method, the 1 pat, you are just killing phoretic mites. Maybe under ideal conditions, you might get some penetration under the cap, but not likely. So again, when would somebody do the 1+1 method? Myself personally, when I'm going through my colonies, I always do the 2 strips. If I do get one colony where I'm looking at the colony, I think maybe there's less than 5 or 6 frames of bees, the colony's on the lighter side. In a case like that, there's probably not going to be a lot of cap brood if the colony is that much smaller. In a case like that, I would do the 1+1 method. Again, the cons are temperature sensitive. Our recommended temperature is between 10 and 30 degrees Celsius. I like 25. I've used it above 25, 30 without a problem, but my comfort zone is 25. And again, like the liquid, it can trigger supersedure, but for me, this has never really been an issue. With most of the fumigants, formic acid and thymol products, fully open entrance, lots of ventilation, no entrance reducers. And in a case of formic acid, it's actually not a bad idea. I run single brood boxes, so I do 2 strips with a single. I would never treat without having a honey super or 2 on. Even if there's no flow on, I give the colonies a couple of supers to move up and expand so they're not overwhelmed by the vapors. And again, stop anytime if anyone's jumping with questions. So Thymovar has been in Canada for a couple of years now. The active ingredient is thymol. Again, it's a fumigant. Temperature range is between 15 and 40 degrees Celsius. The pros with Thymovar, it's naturally derived, it's easy to use. It's more effective in the upper limits. If you get down below, it's not a good early spring treatment, and below 15, it's not going to be very effective. So again, in the upper temperatures, it's good. The cons is it requires multiple treatments, and it shouldn't be used with honey supers on, or only if colonies were not going to be super within 6 weeks. But if you had a colony with a really, really high, very, very high mite infestation midsummer, and you are willing to forfeit your honey and pull your supers, it is an option that you can use during high temperatures. Again, it's an irritant, so you want to use gloves, nitrile gloves. Same with the Formic Pro. Nitrile gloves are fine. This is a new one. Some of you may have heard of this, most maybe not. Apivar has been available in the US for a couple of years. It just got registration here in Canada. So many of the beekeeping supply stores may not even carry it yet, but I believe it is available. The active ingredient is thymol. It's again a fumigant, temperature range between 18 and 30 degrees. Pros, but you can use it in the summertime. You can't use it with your supers on, but you do got to watch this one above 25. I know formic acid gets a really bad reputation for upper limits, but anybody who uses the Apivar above 26 will see excessive bearding and bees leaving the colony. So for those of you who will be experimenting with this year, watch the upper limits. I wouldn't be using it above 25, 26. I do actually have one here. I picked it's a wafer that you break up, and this is what the packaging looks like. I learned something the hard way here. I've had this in my car and bouncing around in my coat pocket, and I just read on the fine print, it says fragile, handle with care. It breaks up. So when you do buy this, fragile, handle with care, because you want to break it in even pieces when you put it in your colony. Where are we going? Okay, HopGuard 2. HopGuard 2, another organic. Unlike the fumigants, this one is a contact strip. The active ingredient is hop beta acids. The pros are it can be used with supers on. The cons is it's not very effective with brood. A good treatment if you don't have a lot of cat brood. It's good early season before you got a lot of cat brood. Late in the season, it is a little messy. Anybody who's used it, it's drippy and messy. So you're definitely going to have gloves on with that. You don't want that to, when you're putting in. It'd be nice if you're careful not to touch your queen with it. Talking to some of my American friends, because I've heard really such mixed reviews over HopGuard 2. When I ask where and how are people really using it in the US, there seems to be some people who will use it early in the season with nukes. So it could be an option with nukes, but again, not for full colonies with a lot of cap brood. You can use it, but keep in mind it's going to be multiple treatments because you're not penetrating the brood cap. Oxalic acid dribble method. This is a contact strip. So the oxalic acid basically has two methods of applying it: the dribble or the, what we call it. Yeah, I call it the dribble method. So you're mixing 35 grams of it in a mixture of 1 liter of 1-to-1 sugar syrup. Pros, very cost effective. It's most effective on broodless colonies. You shouldn't use it more than once in the winter time when your bees are dormant, and it's quite effective. But again, think of it as a cleanup treatment. I think this is a good cleanup treatment. If you're doing a midsummer treatment of another product, and this is your sort of final treatment going into winter, worth doing. Again, this one, you want to be wearing gloves. It's a skin irritant if you get the solution on your, and it also doesn't store well. So you want to mix up small quantities, mix up what we're going to use, and then, you're going to dispose of it or give it away to another beekeeper, but you're not going to be able to store it because it does break down. The oxalic acid sublimation vaporization method. This really should be done when the bees aren't flying, and also when they're not too tightly clustered. An ideal temperature is between 4 and 10 degrees Celsius. Many people will do it colder than that. You can do it colder than that, but if your colony is really tightly clustered, you're not going to get that same impact as if you're in the sort of 4 or 5 degree range. This is really the sweet spot to do that. Again, inexpensive. That's once you buy the equipment. I mean, you're going to have to buy some type of vaporizer, but that's a one-time buy. You can buy, depending on how many colonies you buy. I mean, if you've got a couple of your backyard hobbyists, you can get a pretty inexpensive Varox vaporizer. Then you can move up into a ProVap 110 if you have more colonies. But once you have that, the oxalic acid stuff is pretty inexpensive. It's effective on broodless colonies. It requires specialized equipment. This one, very important with the protective gear, the personal protective gear. You got to use a respirator with an organic acid cartridge with a pre-filter and gloves. This is not like formic acid. Formic acid is basically an irritant. It's unpleasant. If you lean over a formic acid and you breathe it in, it's not going to be pleasant. It's going to cause a reflex cough. If you breathe in the crystals from oxalic acid, it will be in your lungs. So this one's non-negotiable. If you're vaporizing or sublimating, you wear a respirator. Before I get into the synthetic, something I wanted to touch on is for those of us in Ontario who rely on Omafra, Omafra is really behind. Their treatment guide is from 2014. So you're not going to see anything about vaporizing or sublimating on the Omafra guide. You will see the dribble method. You also won't see Formic Pro because they haven't updated since 2014. You won't see Apivar Var because that's just voted. But these products are registered in Canada and they are fine to use. I would not be talking about something you shouldn't be using. One of the challenges with the oxalic acid, there's many challenges with the oxalic acid sublimation vaporization, is that it's really still in the infancy stage. We're learning a lot about it still. There's a lot. There's a lot of debate on the frequency of treatments. There's a lot of debate on how much dosage you should use. The recommended dosage that most we're using was 1 gram per brood box, 2 grams for double. There's a lot of current research coming out of the University of Florida talking about using a much higher dosage. So, this is going to be one of those examples where it's going to be incumbent on you as a beekeeper to do your research, and because it's not cut and dry with how and when to use oxalic acid. Okay, so synthetic compounds. We've got 3 registered synthetic compounds here in Canada, and Apivar, Apistan, and Baverole. They're all contact strips. This is a dummy strip. This is an Apivar strip. This is what it looks like. They all look very similar to this. It's a contact strip that you hang in the hive. Apivar, whoops, let's back up there. Apivar, the active ingredient is amitraz. It's a contact, which basically means the bees have to walk on this. They touch it, they touch each other, they spread it around. That's what a contact is, unlike the fumigant that vapors through the hive and touches the bees. The pros with Apivar is it's safe. And when I mean safe for the applicator when you're using it. It has been highly effective in the past, unless there's mite resistance. So, you know, this one's debatable. According to tech transfer, we don't really have any documented cases of resistance in Ontario. There's anecdotal cases where guys are saying it's not working like it used to, but officially we don't have resistance in Ontario. There's reported cases of resistance across many parts of North America. But as of today, I think it's still an effective product that's worth looking at if you're using synthetic miticides. The cons: low levels of breakdown residue detected in beeswax and honey. So that's why it's really important to follow the label on this one. It's not to be used when honey supers are on. At the end of your 42-day treatment, the strips should come out. You should not leave them in any longer. Leaving them in past the treatment period. These are the issues that lead to resistance. If the instructions say to use 2 strips or 1 strip for every 5 frames of bees, and you got double brood boxes and they're full of bees, then you're using 4 strips. You really should, when you start cutting down on strips, you're leaning towards resistance, because lower levels of exposure are what give the mites the ability to get used to the product and build up resistance. Nitrile gloves, pretty easy PP on this one. The next 2 synthetic miticides available in Ontario, Apistan. Apistan, this is a really interesting case and a real lesson for all beekeepers. When Apistan was first introduced into Canada, this was a highly effective product, 99% efficacy. This was the go-to product. Beekeepers loved it. They used it quick, easy, simple to use. They loved it so much, they used it twice a year, every year for multiple years. And guess what happened? Apistan is pretty much resistant in Ontario. Some people are claiming they're able to use it still. Many beekeepers are saying can't use it here. The active ingredient is fluvalinate. Again, it's a contact strip. Bees touch it. It's got to be above 10 degrees Celsius. It's best used above 10 degrees Celsius. And that's mainly because the bees are moving around. You want your bees active and walking around inside the colony to spread it around. The pros are, and I say caution, this was once a highly effective. Now we have known resistance in Ontario. So you could have residue in your wax and honey if it's not used properly. If you are going to use it and try it, Nitrile gloves. The last synthetic miticide we have in Ontario is Baverole. Baverole was registered with the hope that it could take the place of Apistan. The active ingredient is flumetharin, which is actually very similar to the active ingredient in Apistan. So many people who had resistance to Apistan claims they also have resistance to Baverole. So again, this is, above 10, 42-day treatment. Use this one with, well, I wouldn't advise not, the last 2, Baverole and Apistan, I would advise not to use myself personally. I got to be honest, if you're going to use a synthetic miticide, Apivar is the one. If you do decide you want to use Baverole, the advice I give is the advice that goes for all treatments. It's really important that when we monitor for mites, we know our numbers, and then we monitor again post-treatment to find out, was the treatment effective? And this is really important when we already suspect that it may not be working, but it's a good practice that should be done no matter what you're using. Even with organic compounds, you should be monitoring post-treatment to see how effective it was. So where does that leave us? There's my wife with a notepad and a pen. Notes, very important, very important. You're monitoring for mites, you're doing your counts, write it down. You go back and do your treatment, you do your post-treatment, write it down. Hives are crashing. all of a sudden you lost some colonies, you can go back to your notes. Hey, were these my high mite counts? Were they the ones I treated or didn't treat? Did that treatment work? So the more sort of info you collect for yourself, better, the better off you'll be. Knowledge is power. So, going into winter, what do we need? We need big, strong colonies. They need to be healthy, disease-free, need adequate food reserves. I still think two of the biggest reasons we lose bees in Ontario is inadequate varroa management and inadequate feeding. It's sort of, it's a bit of an art to learn how much to leave, if you're whether it's honey, whether it's feed, adequate size box, and of course, all this comes with experience. So for current honeybee information on honeybee health, I have a preference for honeybeehealthcoalition.org. I like it, even though it's a US association. Why I like it is that constantly updated. It's a free resource. You go to their website, they have a Varroa guide. They have a video for every monitoring method: sugar shake, alcohol wash, sticky board. They have an application video for every manufacturer's product, and they've got no skin in the game. Like here's the pros and cons for each product, and it's up to date. Ontario Bee, the Ontario Beekeeping Association, another resource, great information, lots of links, lots of current research. If you're an Ontario beekeeper and you haven't looked at the OntarioBee.com, or it's not on your favorites, like, get with the program, because we got great resources here and we should be using it. Omafra, I've got a pet peeve with Omafra. I want to support Omafra. I want to say they're our go-to resource. They have not updated since 2014. So you got to be very careful with Omafra, because as of today, whether they like hearing it or not, it's not a reliable, up-to-date resource for current beekeepers. The information is on there is accurate, but it's not up to date. Up to date, I'd be looking at Honeybee Health Coalition. University of Guelph Honeybee Research Center has an excellent YouTube channel. There's a collection of videos in there that, tons of information we should be looking at. So that's my 2 cents. Any questions, comments? Let's talk Varroa management, share experiences. I'm open.
You're welcome to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question, or you can read it in the chat and I will read it for you. Somebody mentioned that the tech transfer recommends shaking the alcohol wash for 20 minutes. And somebody else said my arm would hurt if they did that.
Yeah, I've been to a lot of their workshops, and no, I've never heard 20 minutes. My underdeveloped bicep hurts after 3 minutes.
Tom, I called them out on the 20 minutes at the workshop, and they insisted that it was correct.
Wow. Yeah, well, whoever insisted, that's new information, because I've done their Beekeeping 101 and their IPM several times, and my memory, hey, I could be wrong, but I remember 2-3 minutes.
Maybe it was the individual presenter, but I questioned them on it during the trainer, and they insisted 20 minutes was the recommended shaking time. So perhaps I'll go back to them and ask again.
Yeah, I mean, hey, we're all learning. We all make mistakes. The tech transfer team, they got new people joining them every year, and they do a great job, unless the protocols change, but that sounds excessive. Also, if you were shaking bees in alcohol for 20 minutes, they would start disintegrating. You'd be seeing a lot of yellow poopy stuff in that alcohol wash. You'd have a hard time finding your mites.
Yeah, I think so too. Dale made a comment, which I think is actually pretty important. So in order to do these, the alcohol wash, for sure, you have to scrape bees off. And Dale mentioned that she got her queen once. So make sure you're looking for your queen. You know where your queen is before you do that, that scrape to get them. Sheila was asking what people use on their bottom boards to make them sticky. Dale said that she uses vegetable shortening. I think you could just use oil. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in there and give her some more suggestions.
Yeah, Crisco has been the go-to for many years.
Okay, good. Alin is one of our members, and he runs the Canada Beekeeping Supply Store, and he has the new treatment available at his store already. So you can check in the chat, and he's got a link for that.
Yeah, I picked my sample up there, and you know, I've seen photos of it and I've seen online. I just never used it. Here I am carrying this thing around in my coat pocket for a couple of days and stuff. And I just opened it up and it's kind of all broken up, but that's not a reflection on the product. I mean, it clearly says on the package, like, you know, handle with care, don't be banging the stuff around.
Interesting. We have a question. In your opinion, in small yards, do you treat every hive if you have some high numbers, or only the hives with the high numbers?
Yeah, that's a debatable one. I'm of the opinion, I treat the yard, I treat, you know, I look at the, you know, we often hear that saying that a honeybee colony is like a super organism. You know, it's not one bee, it's a collective, it's a super organism. And I view the yard as the same way. If you got a sick hive in the yard, you're going to have a sick yard soon. So yeah, I treat the yard.
I'm sorry if I missed it because I was a wee bit late, but I wonder what your first step is for keeping the Varroa under control, like at this time of year. Are you doing anything in April, or do you wait for May to do the mite monitoring?
I'm a little obsessive. You know, so far, you know, we've had a couple of warm days, but I've been busy on those warm days. So I haven't pulled any frames, right? I've gone into a couple of colonies, puffed my lid, 1 or 2 were light on feed. I threw in some fondant, closed it up. I like to do all call washes as soon as possible, but I'm doing something different this year because I want to get a number. I want to get a feel for my mites as early as possible. So what I do is I don't have screen bottom boards. I have solid bottom boards. So one day this week, I'll go in, it doesn't matter on the temperature. And I have these little metal slides. I slide in the front through the entrance. And then I'll go in with my Varroa vaporizer and I'll vaporize a couple colonies and go back the next day and look at the 24-hour drop. So I'm doing it not so much as a treatment, even though it kills the mites. I'm doing it as what some refer to as a drop test, right? Okay. So it gives me an indication, like if I go in this year and I do vape and I see if some mites fall, because you never get them all. I mean, if you're lucky, you do, but for most part, there's always some. But if I saw a big drop, then I know, okay, I got to get on treating earlier, right? But it just gives me a little bit of a head start before it gets warm enough to do all call washes. But that's just me. I mean, you don't have to do that. I kind of, but it is something you can do. Although we are going to be warm enough soon to get in there and do an all call wash. It's not that far off. Or if you're using sticky boards, you know, now you can get in there, clean off your sticky boards now, and yeah. But if you noticed in the video, you see, and this is where beekeeping is interesting, where you'll get different information, and you got, at the end of the day, we got to make our own decisions, right? But in the video, she mentioned that the most important time to monitor is between July and October, right? Okay, but I don't want to go in and do an all-call wash in July and find out my numbers are through the roof, right? So to me, July is way too, I need to know my numbers in May, you know? Because if you do have a problem and you find out in July, it could be, you know, the whole idea with Varroa control is trying to, you know, keep them low throughout the year, not let them spike up and deal with them when they spike up, you know.
Kathy's asking, do you have an electric fence around your bee yards? And if so, why? Oh yeah. You know who I am? I'm that proverbial guy who closes the barn door after the horses leave. My first yard that I had in Georgina, the landowner told me there was no bears up there. Okay,
And I had my bees for the first year, no bears. And my second year, I walked out into my yard and I had a row of 10 hives and 5 were missing. And because I walked up a hill, I thought, hey, someone stole 5 of my hives. And then I looked closer and no, they're scattered all over the ground. And then I thought, must have been a hell of a storm up here. And then as I got closer, I saw them all ripped apart by bears. So yeah, anywhere where there's a possibility, even by out north of the Toronto Zoo where I am, there's bears there. So yeah, I have fences there. The only place I don't have electric fences are on the rooftops. Yeah. It's an expense. It's really tough for people who have 1 or 2 hives, to go through that. That's where it's a killer when you're in a bear area and you got 1 or 2 hives to pay that expense, but it's still cheaper than losing 2 hives. Michelle's got a killer fence.
I have bears that pace my electric fence. So yeah, I know about that.
Yeah, I've seen that too, Michelle, where the footprints are all around the fence. They're checking it. Yeah.
How many hives do you have now, Tom?
Well, I went into winter with 50, so I've got 44 now. Yeah. And of the 6 that I lost, 3 of them I would say were bad management decisions. Like most of my survivors are all single brood boxes. I've overwintered 6 frame nukes before, just 6 over 6. I did some 3 and 4 high this year. Too big of a cavity, I think, for the bees to manage and keep warm. For whatever reason, they didn't. It was a failed experiment, or it depends how you look at it. Maybe it was a positive. Maybe I learned. If you learn something, is that a failed experiment? If you learn, don't do this again. I don't know.
Oh, no, I think things are changing so often that you kind of have to do things like that to learn different ways of managing. I know I've been struggling with the weight of my boxes, so if you had managed to pull that one off, I would have been happy about that, just to change some of the things up. So
yeah, one of the reasons why I did it is I didn't pull honey on those hives, and there was a lot of honey, and it was very heavy, and it was 3 high, and I thought, well, I'll just leave them the honey, thinking I'm doing something good. And I know this already, but I had to relearn it again. Is that the honey is useless to them if they can't get to it. You know what I mean? Smaller. I think whatever cavity you're using, it should be appropriate size for the amount of bees in the box. And it was and another one, which was 4 high, was a big booming colony. Like this thing was massive at the end of the season, and I should have split that colony, and that colony ate its food stores and starved. And I feel like a horrible beekeeper when I look at a colony that starved, when I know this was beekeeper error, because that was preventable. But we make decisions sometimes and we make the wrong ones.
I often wonder if in a lot of my hives, when I come out of the winter, they never touch the ones on the outside. And I often wonder if those are actually insulating, like it's more of an insulation for the rest of the bees than actually food for them. So it's interesting.
Well, they'll take that last. They'll go to it last. As it gets warmer and warmer into the spring, and as they deplete everything else, then it's easier for them to get there.
Yeah. Somebody asked, how much time does it take to look after the 50 hives?
Good question. I beekeep most Saturdays. I have a full-time job. I don't do any nighttime beekeeping. And I'm probably, the other thing too is I still consider myself a hobbyist in a sense that I truly, really do enjoy it. So there's quite often times I'll go to my bees on the weekend, and I could, I'll talk to one of my buddies who's a commercial beekeepers, right? And he'll say to me, like, what are you doing there? Like, you only got 20 hives in that yard. You were there last weekend. What are you doing? Because he's got 30 yards he's got to deal with. So for him, every minute counts, right? But, I think, once every 2 weeks, once you but see, I still consider myself on that learning curve, and I learn stuff. You know, the more you're in your hives, the more you learn. There's this whole debate with new beekeepers when people talk about new beekeepers. And some people will tell new beekeepers, "Oh, you got to stay out of your hive. You're in there too often." I don't know. I'm the other way. I think new beekeepers should be in their hive as more often than not to get comfortable, to get really comfortable with their bees. And you know, you might be upsetting your honey production. You might be sort of setting them off, and they may have to work harder to regulate the temperatures. But you know, there's a point where you have to get first-hand knowledge in the bee yard. And I think the only way you do that is by being in your bees. And you know, the more, you know, if you were asked Alain that same question, ask Alain that question. Alain, how often are you in your bees? Like how many colonies is he running?
Every day.
You know?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's every day, and 200, we try to overwinter 200, and we're going a bit above 10% loss.
Yeah. But Alain, now my understanding is you and I probably have the same things, that we have to be careful when we're talking to other people. When you're a hobbyist and you have, you know, 2 or 3 colonies in your backyard, and that's your goal, it's just to keep those 2 or 3 colonies alive. My goal last year was to turn my 25 into 50. My goal this year is to turn my 44 into 88. So clearly I'm going to be in there more often, more aggressive, more.
Yeah. So I would say once a week, because even us, we do rotation, right? We have 3 yards, and then we go, and it's not every day that we open them. We're queen breeders, right? So we have to check the mating nooks, but we inspect at least once a week, especially in the months of May, June, because that's how you catch this, you know, when they do swarm cells. I think a pace of more than 7 days could result in like a swarm, right? So
Yeah,
we watch them more carefully, and 7 days it's our cycle. And we take notes. Like, I know, you know, people would say, "Oh, Aline is taking notes," but we actually have like new standards, and every inspection is written down. And then every spring we do like a recap of how they went in and how they came out of the winter. So that's how we can draw a few more conclusions.
yeah. See, one of the issues I always find a little challenging for newer beekeepers, when we are on a Facebook group and people are talking about different management techniques, is that sometimes we get lost in what is the goal, right? Like, you know, Alain's probably put on pollen sub. I put on pollen sub 3 weeks ago, but my goal is to aggressively split those bees as early as possible. But you know what? As a hobby beekeeper, you don't need to put pollen in. You know, we get a pretty early pollen flow. Our bees are bringing in pollen pretty early.
And it's strong on top of that. So it's early and it's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
Like these days it's already coming, so really no need.
Yeah, but sometimes hobbyists will see that and they'll go out and buy pollen, think they got to put pollen on because they hear other people talking about doing it, not realizing that these are people who are commercial beekeepers with a different focus of trying to, I mean, at the end of the day, we treat our bees like livestock. You know, we're managing livestock and we're trying to grow them, but it's neither good nor bad. It's just what our method is and what we're doing, right? But I find sometimes, you know, on the Facebook pages, that's not clear to people, you know?
Yeah, I would say that, and this is what I preach to my customers, pick 1 or mostly 2 guides or mentors, not more than that. Internet is full of them, but each one, you know, practices beekeeping specific to their region, their own like family schedule and so on. So you should have 1, maximum 2, and just stick with that. And the internet, like, don't pick 3 off the internet. Like, 1 is in Florida, 1 is who knows where in Europe, and then 1 is in Canada, but like in the prairies, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because definitely beekeeping is local. One of the things I find interesting and fascinating at the same time is that it's difficult not to fall into this we tend to think of weather and seasons by the calendar. And last year was a really good example. Last year, I knew I wanted to double my colonies. We had a very warm spring. It was warmer earlier. And I was putting on foundation on my colonies and feeding syrup very early, too early for most years. And I had a couple of guys actually say to me, you can't be putting liquid syrup in before this date. I remember saying, what does a date have to do with anything? Look at the temperature. and we fall into that sometimes because every year we do this on, 1st of May. And I think this is part of the reason why many people had very high losses due to Varroa this year, is that we have built-in times when we treat and monitor in the spring and midsummer. And last year was a very unusual year. Like our bees got a head start and the Varroa got a head start. And by midsummer, many people's Varroa levels were much higher than normal because of that warm weather. And we get fooled by the calendar.
Good point.
Yeah. I think it has paid a large part on some of the losses this year.
I would strongly advise beekeepers to, like, every day when they wake up, just check the weather. That will give you more hints about when to do what than a fixed calendar.
Yeah. Yeah, and my sort of, I have a beekeeping friend, I use the same product every year. I'm comfortable with it. I learned how to use it. It works for me. I have a beekeeping friend who uses a totally different product, has great success, doesn't lose bees over the winter. And this is, I chuckle about this because it's human nature. He says to me, like, I was thinking about trying something different this year. And I'm like, why? Why? It's working for you every year. You have great success. Why? Why would you change, right? And sometimes I think, I might try what he's doing. Like, why? It's what I'm doing is working for me, right? But it's kind of a funny thing we do as beekeepers. We know it works, and then we'll try something else, and we go back to what we know works.
Mark is in Bowmanville, and he said that they've seen large amounts of pollen in the last 3 days. And the first pollen sighting was the same date as last year. That's interesting.
Yeah, I got.
And then, have you seen pollen coming in too?
Yeah, well, I'm in Toronto here. I got pictures of pollen from like 4 weeks ago.
Wow.
Yeah, we had a couple of warm days, and like whatever trees were popping downtown, they was silver maples. I don't know, but yeah, I was just looking on my camera to see the date, but it's
Mark says his is March 21st.
Yeah, March 21st. I'm looking. Yep, tons of pollen March 21st. A lot.
That came in.
Yeah.
And then Dale mentioned that she's excited about the calendar that Marion has put together with her group, because it's a good basis for us to move forward, but a good idea to check the weather.
Hey, when I'm when I'm saying it, don't get hung up on the calendar, right? I don't mean our calendar that we've done, right? No, like,
Yeah.
like my point is, no, that's a good guide, because brand new beekeepers, we don't know what we need. That calendar to say, here's what you look for in May, here's what you look for in June. That calendar is an excellent resource, right? What I'm saying is that we need to do that calendar, but we also have to be conscious of, is this May an average May, or is this May way colder than most May? So we need to adapt. So the calendar is a great tool, but what I'm saying, we have to be careful we don't become creatures of habit where we don't take our wraps off until this date every year. And you know what I mean? Like again, last year was an interesting year. I typically take my wraps off May 24th. They were off much earlier last year.
So Tom, if I could speak for a second, Damien, who's an environmental professor, put together the climate data, and the climate data is average climate data for the month. And that's exactly what it is. We know that, like, for example, you could have an ice storm in April, but the average climate data. So it's a reference point for everyone, but nothing is in stone. And the guide is a guide, just to, as you said, to make sure that people kind of watch and use it as a checkpoint. But it's up to each of the individual beekeepers to use their own discretion as to when to do certain things with the that are listed on the calendar.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree 100%, Marion. I realized when I was saying calendar, you know, I was
You
saying
weren't meaning ours, I
yeah,
know.
I was saying don't get
Yeah,
fixated
absolutely.
on days,
Yeah.
because brand new beekeepers, they have no frame of reference. So we need that calendar to tell them, you know, here's the frame of reference. Here's your, yeah.
Mhm. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Dale said that I think silver maple and coltsfoot might be starting out already. I know where I am, it's not, but do we have any more questions? I wanted to make mention of the fact, Michelle and I were very lucky to spend some time with Tom a couple of years ago and actually watch him do an alcohol mite wash. I know for myself, it's something that always gives me a lot of anxiety when I think that I have to do this, but certainly after watching Tom and the calm manner with which he did it, it kind of gave me a reset. And so we're really hoping that we can get to one of Tom's bee yards, hopefully this summer or at some point, and that he can give a demonstration for everybody. So for all of those, me included, who need visual teaching, we'd like to make that happen this summer, hopefully, if we can keep these COVID numbers from going up any further.
Yeah.
So that's on the table. Hopefully we'll be able to sit with you, Tom, and get that organized.
Yeah, Lucy, I'm going to be open most Saturdays in May and June at the yard out by the zoo in Scarborough. It's pretty accessible. It's not that far. Yeah, I'm definitely always open to do that. I'm there anyways. I'm doing it. You know, people can reach out to me or Michelle. Don't be shy. And maybe we'll put something formally on the Facebook page with dates. It's just hard to throw out dates now because of weather, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I hope that can happen for everybody and everybody can experience a calm mite wash, experience. Go ahead.
I just have to say that I learned that from, I was in California with Randy Oliver, and I started washing some bees in his yard, and he looked at me and he was like, and he can be pretty rough around the edges, right? He says, like, what the hell are you doing, man? And he's like, calm down. He's like, you guys are rushing around. I had this nervous energy. He goes, relax, shake the bees in the tub, put the frame back. They're not going anywhere. The old ones will fly back to the hive. Get your scoop. And he's like, they're dead now. They're not called. Put them aside. Close up the hive. Like nice and calm. He says, you know, according to Randy, this is a very common new beekeepers when they do alcohol washes because it's kind of a little nerve wracking. But so, and it stuck with me. So I'm consciously very calm and slow when I do it.
Good. I think, Ellen, you just posted maybe a demonstration of the alcohol watch, but it's kind of nice to do it in person. I think we're all itching to get back with each other. Oh, first inspection of the year. There you go. So Ellen has posted a first inspection of the year on the chat if anybody wants to look at that. We're coming back in May with the tech transfer team talking about apparently the high number of losses for this year already they're finding. So we'll be talking about that and hopefully getting another good speaker in to talk to you. Thank you all for attending tonight. And please feel free to reach out to Michelle or Tom if you would like to do that. We will try and organize something as well. Okay.